What's going on, DJBooth.net? This is Kareem Julian, aka DJ Blaze, and I'm here in the lab to give you guys a quick rundown review video of the new Traktor 2.5 Pro software and the new Traktor Kontrol F1 DJ controller that you can use to control the new remix decks that are now offered in Traktor 2.5 Professional Edition. So basically, what are the remix decks? The remix decks are what Traktor is going to use now in order to supplement live performances for DJs, where they can use these cool 16 style pads to make remixes on the fly and do cool performances like make beats and mash them all up, and then you even use them for your DVS system to play it all back and to scratch it up and all types of different things that you can do. So instead of your sample decks, you now have remix decks, and these remix decks can accept one-shot samples, just sounds, loops, or samples, or even full tracks. You can load a full track into any one of these slots on your remix deck. So we're going to break it down by hardware and software, and we'll just go by the software first, since it's a little bit easier to explain to you what's done in the software, and then we can go over to the hardware. So basically, the software, Traktor 2.5, it's the new update. Again, they give you the remix decks instead of the sample decks. The price is a little bit lower than it used to be in the past for the actual software, and the software full Pro Edition will come with all of the controllers, including the Traktor Audio 6 and the Traktor Audio 10, which are the DVS style boxes, sound cards that you can use in order to play back your digital files on vinyl or on CD timecode. So basically, you got a lower price here, and it replaces the sample decks for the remix decks. You get your 64 banks. When you're using the remix decks, you get 64 banks. I know you only see 16 pads here, but when you turn this knob, it gives you a new page. That way, you get 4 pages in total. So 4 times the 16 gives you 64 different areas where you can load tracks, you can load one-shot samples, you can load loops. All to these individual pads can have any item that you need in there. Any length of sample or any length of track or whatever you need can be loaded into any one of these pads. And remember, it's not just 16 per remix deck, it's actually 64, because when you turn this knob, you will bring up a whole nother layer to the actual pad system. So basically, they give you 1.4 gigs of different sounds and grooves and samples and loops for you to use right out of the box, and it's a lot of fun to use, and it's definitely more for a performing style DJ, a DJ who's going to, press these buttons and have instant cues and instant loops in order to be more of a live performance rather than just to play a record and keep it going and then mix to your next record. Not saying that that's not hard, because that's what I do, and it does take skill. But this probably takes a little bit more skill, and it's a little bit longer of a learning curve, but it's a lot of fun to use, and it's pretty cool. It's cooler than the sample decks because you get the sample decks features, and on top of that, you're getting a lot of other features and different options that you can use with these remix decks. So other things with the Traktor 2.5 software, you have a few improvements. There's an improvement in your beat grid and your BPM detection. That way, when the Traktor software tries to map your actual or analyze your song, it will have a better beat grid, and it'll know more accurately of where your BPM lies and where your actual hits lie in the track. So there's cool improvements with BPM detection. For the sake of this review, I completely wiped out my old beat grid and had a whole new beat grid and analyzation done on my files. That way you don't have any issues with your old files or your old beat grids interrupting with these. But I'm not sure if that was something that had to be done, but I just did it for me, and that's the way I went about it. The remix decks right now can only be mapped to the Traktor Kontrol F1. You may be able to map some of the easier functions, but there's a lot of functionality going on here, and we'll run that down when we go through the hardware. But there's a lot of functions that won't be able to be mapped within the software to any other controller. So for now, you're stuck with the Traktor Kontrol F1. And another limitation that you might want to notice is that only one F1 controller can control only one remix deck at a time. You can move the dial after pressing shift in order to change to your other deck. You can change to deck A, B, C, or D, but you might want to do things with the remix decks that requires you to use 2 remix decks at a time. Even me as a novice user, there was times where I wish I had 2 of these so that I can do 2 different decks of remix decks use. So that's something to keep in mind that you may want to look into if you're one of those super users and you really use controllers to your maximum potential during your DJ sets. You'll probably want one of these for each of your remix decks that you're planning on using. Now for the Traktor F1 control hardware. If it looks familiar to you, it should, because it's basically the same casing and dimensions and construction as the Traktor Kontrol X1, which is the DVS style controller that some of us use. And it's a plastic shell and chassis all the way on the outside. On the front panel, there's a brushed aluminum panel for added rigidity to the whole unit. Right at the top, we have buttons and knobs, and we can just walk you through the functions of everything right off the bat from the top to the bottom. From the top, we have your filter knobs. And I'm going to read this off in the way that it comes, because the Traktor Kontrol F1 is a full-out MIDI controller, meaning you can map it to any software of your choice, and you can also map it to Traktor, how you want it to work within Traktor, without using it for the remix decks by just pressing the Shift and the Browse button, which is really the MIDI control. You can go right over to MIDI mode, and this can be used for different items instead of just using it for the remix decks. You can use it for, by default, when you do press MIDI, these different buttons become cue points, they become loop controls, and everything else is mapped differently. These become effects settings. So there's a lot of versatility with the hardware as a whole, since it can be mapped to whatever you need it to. But most users off the bat are going to spend this money because they want to use it with the remix decks. So right at the top, each of your remix decks actually falls under a 4-slot system. So your remix deck, even though this is just one deck, you have 4 slots, just like when you had sample decks, that you can use at a time. So even though you have 16 pads times 4 down here to use, only one column of your pads can be played at a time. So even if you have 64 of these sounds and different things set up, remember, one column can only be played at a time. So this column here will correspond to your volume control. These are volume control faders. These faders are just like the channel faders that are found on the S2 and the S4. You have your same knobs that are found on the S2 and the S4. And these knobs are for filter. These are your low and your high pass filters at the top, so you can do those on the fly. Again, your volume controls, so you can control the volume of each one of those slots within your remix deck. You have a sync master button, very easy to use. You press sync when you want to sync it to the BPM that's currently playing, or you press shift and hit sync. That'll give you your master, and that'll make that deck your master BPM deck. You have a Quantize feature. Most EDM style DJs are going to want to have the deck quantized. That way you have your BPM rolling and everything is going to be on beat. So when you press one of your hi-hats samples, for example, you press it and it will only act when it's ready to be on beat. So that way you can keep everything on beat. You got to edit, shift edit there. That way you can edit any of the sounds or any of the actual things you have listed in your remix deck. You have a capture, and the capture button is usually used when you want to capture a certain sound and place it onto one of your pads. You just press capture and you press the pad that you want it to put on. And when you want to delete that, you press shift and capture. That will delete what you have stored in that pad. The Rotary Encoder here can be used for many different things. It's mostly used for switching between your layers of your 16 pads down to your next page. You have 4 pages, like I said earlier. And you also use it to go between remix decks, deck A, B, C, and D. So that way you can use one controller to control multiple remix decks, but you do have to go in, press shift in the encoder in order to change which deck you're using at a time. Next up, you got your shift button. That just makes for dual purpose on most of your keys here. Next up, you have your reverse. And you're allowed to play your samples in reverse. You can hold it down, you press the reverse key, and you're playing whatever you had there playing normally will play in reverse, but also quantize and also to the same speed that it was already set at. So it's a pretty cool feature. You press shift in reverse and you got a color button. That way you can change the colors of your different pads. It's easy to, change maybe all the colors of bass buttons to blue, then change all your snares to orange. So that way you have a cool workflow and you know exactly what type of button you're pressing before you press it. So color coding is cool. You also have a type button. The type will change it from a one-shot to to a continuous play loop, and different types of playback features there. And there's also a pitch button. You can hit shift and pitch, and that will allow you to adjust the pitch or the sound or the key that the sound is actually in. You also have a size button where you can press size and grow and shorten the size of whatever you have listed in each of these pads. Then you have a speed button there as well. You press shift and size, and that brings up the speed options, where you can change or lower the actual speed of the sample or whatever it is you're playing on these pads. And then you have your browse button and your shift MIDI button. That shift MIDI will bring you into a complete MIDI mode on your controller, and you can map this any way you know how. And you can also go back and forth between your remix decks and whatever you have set here for your MIDI purpose. So that way it kind of brings it into a double style controller. That way you can use it for two different things at a time. Next up, you have what everybody's talking about is the 16 pads here. These are not velocity sensitive pads. They are, whenever you touch it, they're acting, and they feel really good. They're soft to the touch, but they're very tactile. They do have a really low audible click to them, but they're very nice. They beg for you to use them. They're very good in practice. They're super accurate, and they're just very good all around. No complaints with those there at all. Then you have these 4 buttons down at the bottom, and basically these are like mute or stop buttons that allow you, when pressed, to just pretty much mute the line that you have actually acted upon in the same column. So for your remix slot 1, this will mute it, the first button over here. For your remix slot 4, button over here will mute it as well. So in use, the Traktor 2.5 Pro and Traktor Kontrol F1 was a lot of fun to use. You know, most hip-hop style DJs might not use something like this. This is more suited to the EDM style, high BPM music DJs out there, because it's a little bit easier to do when you're doing that style of music. I could see more hip-hop DJs using these for one-shot type samples, maybe dropping a bomb here and there on a track. But it can also be used to make some beats on the fly too, and you know, have a little fun with it in that nature as well. You won't be able to save your workflow like how you can in Machine, or if you're using an MPC. It's not made for making beats and then going in and changing your tracks and really producing a track. This is more for a live performance, DJs who want to put on a live performance while they're also DJing at the same time. But on the bright side, you will be able to save anything that you guys have programmed within your pad. So once you set all your pads up, all 64 pads within your remix deck, you can easily hit the save key and bring your whole remix deck down and save it within a file, so you can bring it back exactly how you had it set earlier. So very good in use, lots of fun. Remix decks might not be for everyone. There's a high learning curve, but you know, for the people who can pull it off, it's really fun to use. And it's a really cool new feature that Traktor has. You know, before this, the only people who could use something like this was guys who used 2 software at a time, such as Serato with Ableton Live. But now Traktor's cleaned it up a bit, and they made it so it's pretty versatile, and everything fits in this nice Kontrol F1 controller. I'm sure soon enough they'll release the mapping so that any other controller you have can do the same functions, but as of right now, you'll only be able to use most of the functions within the remix decks with the Traktor Kontrol F1. So on the Pro side, you have remix decks that are a lot of fun to use. Their workflow can be saved for future use. The update for Traktor 2.5 is slightly more stable, and the F1 controller can be custom mapped as a MIDI controller. On the downside, you can only use one F1 controller to control the remix decks at a time, and of course, only remix decks can be mapped to only the F1 for now. So we're going to recommend these to any type of DJ who wants to get into that remix style of actual DJing and performance style of actual DJing. And we'll also recommend this to DVS users or any user who actually wants to get into the remix deck thing but still wants to use knobs or encoders and rotary controls for different functions within your DVS system. So it can double as both of those, but then you're only using one controller at a time. You don't need to plug many controllers in. You have a nice layer, Shift MIDI, so you can switch between your remix decks functionality and switch back to your MIDI functionality right there on the fly. So we're going to recommend this to anyone who wants to get into that style of DJing. and anyone else who really needs a good, solid MIDI controller to do many of your other functions that you do while you're DJing. So for more on the full written review, head on over to www.djbooth.net/DJS. You can also keep subscribing to the YouTube channel. That way you get these videos as soon as they come out. That's Real DJ Blaze. And keep subscribing to the Twitter as well. That way you get all your news, reviews, and everything DJ equipment right up to date where you hear it first. And that's twitter.com/DJBlaze_DJ Booth. Thanks for watching.